Good morning. Welcome back to Brian Keene's Secret Histories. I am your host, Brian Keene, sitting here on the floor in my office, surrounded by the fruits of my labors all these years. And the reason I'm showing you a glimpse of the brag shelves is because you should note that for every edition of my books, save the lettered editions, I have three copies. Uh, Three copies of that hardcover Dead Sea, three copies mass market paperback, three copies trade paperback, three copies German edition, three copies Spanish edition, etc. That's going to be important here in a moment as we talk about LeHorn's Hollow. Now, you would think, given that this is an omnibus of Dark Hollow and Ghost Walk, and since we've already covered those in previous videos, that I wouldn't have a lot to say about this. And technically, you'd be right. We've covered the creation of both those novels. We've covered their history, their impact, where they came from. So I don't have a lot to say about those. But I do want to talk about this format. This was produced for the Science Fiction Book Club. And I loved the Science Fiction Book Club when I was a kid. Back in the 70s and 80s, they would have these ads in the back of all the magazines, Fangoria and Omni and Twilight Zone and Horror Show and all the others. And basically, I forget the amount. I think you sent away like $1 and you got, like 8 books in the mail for $1. Well, then, of course, you've joined the book club, and every month you had to mail this thing back, or you got the book for free, or not for free, you got this book automatically in the mail, and it would piss a lot of parents off. Basically, you'd get all these books for free at the beginning for, $1, basically. And then if you didn't read the fine print, basically you had to buy, I don't know, like 6 more throughout the year. And if you didn't, they would charge you for all those books you got for $1. And you also had to mail this thing back every month saying, I don't want this book, or they would send you a book automatically and charge you for it. My parents never cared because my parents, they were all about me reading. We didn't have a lot of money. We were lower middle class, but they always, always, always made sure I was able to get books and comics. And most of my early teenage library was a result of the Sci-Fi Book Club. I'm going to show you some favorites of mine that I got from the book club over the years. This is the novelization of my dear departed friend George Romero's Dawn of the Dead, 2001: A Space Odyssey, probably the first adult science fiction book I'd ever read. Just blew me away. And another favorite, Spinner. This is one that not a lot of folks know about. A real good horror science fiction mashup. I loved the Sci-Fi Book Club, and so I was beyond thrilled when Leisure Books sold the subrights for a book club edition of LeHorn's Hollow. They also sold at the same time subrights for The Rising. So that was neat. This came out first, followed immediately by this. Eventually, there would also be a version of Gathering of Crows. Here's what you need to know about these books. Suddenly, I'm in the Sci-Fi Book Club. You can imagine, given my nostalgia, how exciting it was, and it was. But I never got paid for them. I never saw a dime for these books, and they sold ridiculous amounts. I got the accounting later. I got the sales statements. I saw what they moved. Sci-Fi Book Club, under their agreement with Leisure, sent the money to Leisure. Leisure was supposed to send the money to me. I never saw a dime. That's because the Great Recession was underway, as we've been talking about in the last couple videos. And what I didn't know, I knew that Leisure was struggling, like every other publisher at the time. What I didn't know is just how much money they were hemorrhaging. Not only did I never get paid for these books, I never even got copies as per my contract. These copies that you see here, I had to buy on the secondhand market. I keep 3 copies of everything. It was pretty easy to track down Gathering of Crows. LeHorn's Hollow was a pain in the ass to track down, particularly copies that were in good condition. And The Rising was ridiculously expensive to track down. A lot of eBay sellers mistakenly thought that this was the first edition hardcover. It is not. The Delirium edition was the first edition hardcover, but they would sell this as first edition hardcover. And I paid that price 3 times just to get my 3 copies. Now, I cannot look at these books, even today, without this sick sort of drop in my stomach when I think about how much money I was owed for them. And it's money that I never saw. But then, I think about young Brian. And I think about the young kid that was a member of the Sci-Fi Book Club when these came out. And I think about young Brian getting these. I know it's jerky camera movements, and if you got vertigo, you're probably getting motion sickness right now. But, these videos are bootleg. I think about this because I've met people that have told me this. There were young folks who these were some of their first adult books. The Rising, LeHorn's Hollow, Gathering of Crows. And I think back to young me, some of my first adult books. And that anger and depression over getting screwed, over not getting paid, it dissipates, because I know that there are people out there who, when they're my age, they will still have these beloved copies, much as I have these beloved copies. I know there are much nicer editions of 2001 out there. I know that there are other editions of Dawn of the Dead, but that hardcover is hard to find. I don't know about Spinner. I don't know if it ever got a paperback release or not. I'll have to look that up. But my point is, these were somebody's firsts. And I can't be filled with anger about the cost to me, because it introduced somebody to my work. And I'm sure that later they bought books of mine, which I did get paid for. So it's a mixed bag. The edition itself is very nice. Let's get these out of the way. And let's just take a look real quick before we end this video. Nice dust jacket. Cover flap and everything. As I said, it's an omnibus of Dark Hollow and Ghostwalk. Very basic spine, but a very cool moment for me. I just wish it wasn't tainted. But I guess, like everything else in LeHorn's Hollow, there's a price, and everything is tainted. So that is it for this edition of Secret Histories. Up next, we are going to enter the cage. We'll see you then. Peace.